Hello everybody, my name is Valerie Greenwell and welcome to Quilt Artistry. Today we're going to be working on the March placemat, which is a Shamrock placemat. If you are in the Sweet Dreams Quilt Studio Crown Jewel Club, this will be in your February collection. So this neat little pattern only has two fabrics. You have a lighter background fabric and a darker like a contrasting fabric for the shamrock. And if you want to make a set of 4 placemats, you're going to want about a yard of your lighter color fabric and about a half a yard of your darker fabric. So on your darker fabric, you're going to want to cut this probably about maybe 9 by 10, 9 by 11, give or take. And on the back of this, you want to put a little bit of heat and bond light or whatever your favorite fusible is. Put that on the back, and then for the stuff in the middle here, you can either use batting if you want to use batting, but I have chose to use. Hang on, let me get my stuff over here. I am using a Pellon 926. Can you see that? I'm using a Pellon 926 interfacing. This is a non-fusible interfacing. It's stiff, but it's not as heavy as Peltex, and it's washable. Okay, so to start this out, I'm going to talk a little bit about the pattern. On the top pattern here, I'm going to zoom in. I have broken this pattern apart so you can see the outline or the whole placemat size is about 13 by 18.66. Now I have changed the size of this to be 13 by 18.66 because I thought this was a better fit for my table. The default size for this pattern is 15 by 20. So depending on the size of table that you have, you can scale this up or down. And let's see here, the shamrock, so you know what size to cut your contrast fabric. It is just shy of 7 inches by 8 1/4. So you want your contrast fabric to be a little bit larger than that. You could do maybe 8 by 9, 8 by 10, something like that. So that's what we're working with. So down here on the quilt, you need a background or a backing fabric for this. You can use muslin, you can use some ugly fabric that you're trying to get rid of. It doesn't matter because it isn't going to show. When this whole thing stitches out, eventually in the end you'll be turning this inside out, so all of this right here will not show at all. So to start out with, I have my interfacing cut to 15 by 20, and I have it basted into place, and we are ready to go. So this is the pattern that we're going to stitch, and I am going to draw a boundary around my interfacing that I have on the quilt, or on the frame here. So we're just going to do a quick click out of this on the 4 corners. All right, now that marks my boundary, and I'm going to zoom in on the screen here. What you want to do is you want to put your pattern in the center of the boundary that you marked. And that looks good to me. Now everything is ready to stitch. You want to take your background fabric, which is going to be your lighter fabric, and put it over the top of your interfacing and use a couple pins to just pin it into place. This is going to hold everything down while we get started with our stitching. Okay, now that I have everything pinned in place, we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, this pattern is going to stitch out in 3 different sections. First, it's going to stitch an outline, which is just a rectangular box. And then, if you look at the screen here, then it's going to stitch those corner Celtic knots. And you want your initial thread, when we start out doing this, you want to have a contrasting thread. So as you can see on the back of the machine here, I have a nice dark green thread loaded, and I get really high contrast with this thread on my background fabric. After it stitches these Celtic knots, then we're going to change thread colors to a lighter color of thread to stitch the background lines, and then we're going to go back to the dark thread to stitch the shamrock. Okay, so here we go. We're going to go ahead and click Start Quilting. And just in case you're wondering, I have my speed set to 12, and I am stitching at 12 stitches per inch. So this is going to go around, and it's just going to stitch the outline. This is going to give us the basic footprint of this placemat. Everything else that it stitches will be inside of this rectangle. So once it stops, now we're going to go and it's going to start stitching these Celtic knots. So it's going to take a little bit to stitch this out. I'm going to let the machine stitch, and then we'll come back when we're ready for the next step. Okay, so it is about ready to wrap up its stitching. Here we go. So now we can see the whole thing. It has stitched the entire outline of the Celtic knots, and now we are ready to change our thread. At this point, you should change your thread to something that matches your background. So you can see on the back of my machine here, I have a nice light color of green. So I'm going to change my thread and come back, and then we'll be ready for the next step. Okay, so I have my thread changed, and we're ready to go to the next step. So I'm going to hit continue. And now it's going to start stitching this background. So you can see how well that light green thread blends in with this part. This is the part you really want it to just blend in and not really be seen. So this is going to stitch the lines that go across the background this way, and it's going to stitch the outline of the shamrock here in the middle. So this is going to take a little bit to stitch. I'm going to let it stitch, and then we'll come back in a few. Okay, so we're back. It is just finishing up the stitching of the background lines. And now that it's tying off, we're going to go ahead and change the thread back to the dark green and let it stitch the shamrock. Okay, so I have my dark green thread loaded again, and now it's time to add your contrast fabric with your heating on. So take the paper off the back. And you're just going to slip that right on top of your shamrock. And you want to make sure that this covers all sides. You shouldn't see any of the previous stitched line that was stitched in the light green thread. So you're going to get that in position and then pin it into place. Okay, so I kind of smooth that out a little bit. That looks good. Okay, now, okay, so we just hit continue. And this is going to come out here, and it's going to stitch the first outline of the shamrock all the way around. Okay, now we're going to cut the thread, and it's going to stitch the detail inside the shamrock. These look so cute when they stitch out. All right, just about to finish up here. Okay, so now we're going to cut the thread and move the machine head out of the way and pull the pins out. Now, if you have some embroidery scissors, it doesn't really matter what kind. I have a whole collection of them. I have these pretty little gingers. These are your classic stork embroidery. These are bent. I kind of like these sometimes for this because they allow you to get in there at a little bit of a different angle. And then these are a curved pair. It doesn't matter what kind you use. Just find a pair that you're comfortable with. And you want to get if you look at the outline here, you want to stitch as close to the edge of this outline as you can without cutting into the stitches. You don't want to cut into that at all. So I'm just going to start by snipping this away. See, these work great for that. Now if you are not comfortable trimming this while it is on the long arm, what you can do is just make sure that you don't have any excess fabric down below, and you can go ahead and finish this, and then you could trim this out after you get it off the frame. So I'm usually pretty quick at this. So I'm going to go ahead and trim out my shamrock, and then we'll come back. Okay, so you can see I have my shamrock trimmed out. I might do a little bit of cleanup after I get it off of the quilt frame, but that's really good for now. So now what you want to do is take your backing fabric and you're going to cover over the top. And you're going to smooth it out and drop a couple pins in it just to hold it down. Okay, now we're ready to stitch. This is the last line of stitching, and it's going to stitch the whole outline all the way around. Okay, and that is it. So now all we have to do is cut the thread and take it off the frame. So now what we're going to do, we've got this, we'll get the pins out here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it off the frame and take it over to the table and cut it out. So I'll get it off the frame and then we'll be back. Okay, so I have all of this cut off of the frame and we're ready to trim it out. You can see on the back side here, we see all of the stitching. This is not the side that you want to cut on. So when we're trimming this, you want to be looking at the wrong side of your backing fabric here, okay? So you'll see your single line here. Now, before you do any trimming, this is very important. This is where your opening is here. About an inch away from the opening, snip, and then on the other side, snip. This fabric here, you are not going to trim at all. You're going to need that when you get ready to close it all up. But all of this here, this part, can be trimmed. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to take your ruler with your 1/4 inch mark. You're going to put that 1/4 inch line right along that stitch line, just like that. And then take your rotary cutter and cut that off. You're going to do this all the way around. You want to be as accurate as possible to get that good clean 1/4 inch. Okay. Now, this side could be a little bit tricky because, remember I said, this is what you don't want to cut. So this part, you're going to fold it up so it's out of the way. You're going to put your ruler on, so it should kind of go over the top of that. Okay, now you're going to line up on that line there and down below. Just be mindful of where that little flap of fabric is because you don't want to cut that off. Okay. Now I'm going to cut right up to the edge of that and make sure I'm not on my fabric. Okay, there we go. Now, all of that looks good. This is going to be what you use to tuck under and sew it closed. And you need that extra bit of fabric. Now, on your corners here, you're going to take your scissors or rotary cutter. I think it's easier to do this with scissors. You're going to snip that corner off, just clipping the diagonal corner. This is going to make it a lot easier to turn. Do that for all 4 corners. Now, you're going to want to flip this inside out through this hole. And I have one already flipped here that I'm going to show you. So here, you can see I have it flipped inside out. And this flap that we had here, this is what you're going to use to sew it closed. And so it'll tuck in there, and that'll just give you a little bit of extra fabric to help get that stitched closed. So once you have it turned, and I should say, I don't know what they call this here. I call it a little pokey stick, a turning tool, whatever. But you can use this on the flat side, okay? And you put it in through the hole, and you can get to those corners and really poke them out. Make sure you do not use the sharp point because it'll go through the fabric, and then you'll have to do a repair. So here, we'll just poke through all of the corners, just like that. Now, you get this stuff out of the way here. Go over to the machine, or over to the iron here. So you want to get this tucked in right along this line. You can see this is the initial sewing outline right here. That should be on the inside, just like that. So you're going to tuck in both of those flats of fabric and line up. You want that seam line to be right smack in the middle, okay, when you start to press this. So you're going to hold that down, make sure your seam line is in the middle, and then you're going to give it a good press on all sides all the way around. Depending on the fabric that you're using, you might want to go ahead and do this on both sides. I like to do it on both sides because I think it gives a nice crisp press to the back side. Okay. And you want to get a really good crease in your open spot because it's going to make that a lot easier for you to close that down. Now, I do not like to use pins for this because I think that pins don't allow this to lay flat. So I have, this is applique glue. It was really made for raw edge applique and gluing things down. If you have Elmer's glue, you could use Elmer's. But I like this. It has a nice little spout. It makes it very easy to do a light, just like a dot of glue without making a mess. So what I'm going to do is just drop about a few drops of glue right along the edge of this, like where that stitch line is, and then carefully lay your backing fabric over that, just like that. Should be a nice clean line, almost hides it, okay? Now, use a little bit of heat. The heat is going to help dry that glue. Now, you don't even see it there. Now, what you can do if you're a hand stitcher, you can do a hidden stitch and stitch that closed. If you're a machine stitcher, you can just stitch right along the edge of that with your sewing machine. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. Now, if you have anything on your shamrock that still needs trimmed, go ahead and trim it up now. And then once you have all of this cleaned up and trimmed around the way you want, then you're going to take your iron and you're going to press on each section for 6 seconds. If you're using Heat and Bond Light, 6 seconds is the perfect amount of time to be able to bond fabric to fabric. If you're using a different kind of fusible, you should really read your instructions to see what the recommended fusing time is. And so that's that. So now we have everything trimmed, it's turned, the applique is fused down. We have this little edge glued here. I'm going to trim these loose threads back. Now, once we're almost done at this point, almost. So now we're ready to take this to the domestic machine and give it a nice little stitch. And what you are going to do is stitch right along the edge of this. You're going to use your 1/4 inch foot and you're going to do a 1/4 inch stitch all the way around the outside edge of this, and you're going to stitch this closed either by hand or by machine, whichever you prefer. So I have this one here, which I've already completed, and I'm going to turn this around so you can see where my opening was. I just did a straight line stitch right on the edge of that to close it, and then a nice clean 1/4 inch stitch all the way around. That kind of gives a simulated binding look without having to do the binding. And so that's it for this one. All in all, it's really not a lot of work for a really cute design. So thank you guys for joining me today. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And you guys have a great day. Thanks.